right. So first of all, thank you so much for joining our panel discussion tonight. I am Havana. I am not only the lead of Ladies at UX, but I will be your moderator tonight. Fun. So what this discussion is tonight is all about enterprise UX. So this discussion will be about UX strategy, design, and research at B2B SaaS companies. And SaaS means software as a service. A little bit of housekeeping. Please stay muted if you are not one of the speakers. If you do have questions, feel free to hop in the chat and throw some questions in there. Keisha and Ying will be helping me manage that. We will be taking a Q&A at the very end. So feel free to pop in questions and then we'll address them at the end. And then finally, without further ado, let's go ahead and have each of the panelists introduce themselves and we'll just jump right into the questions. Deanne, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thanks. Hi, my name is Deanne Stock. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am currently the Director of Experience Strategy and Insights at the Big Nerd Ranch here in Atlanta.
Amber, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm Amber Banks. I'm a senior project manager at Warner Media. Also do some freelance project management. And I was formerly a program manager for a UX program at a different company. So I've been dragging my UX knowledge from place to place and enforcing it on people, even though I'm not specifically in UX anymore.
That's wonderful. Karen, let's have you go next.
Hi, I'm Karen, like a car that goes in something. It's a helpful part. Then I don't have to listen for all the variations. So Karen Hoff, I am she, her. I am a lead UX designer at Honeywell, but I always refer to myself as an information architect. It better aligns with what I'm going to care about in every single meeting. And currently I am heading up the UX for a new thing we're making, which is customer self-service admin and configuration of all of our cloud services.
Very enterprising. Last but not least, Rihanna.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Rihanna Dawson. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm a senior UX designer at Truist. And I work within the commercial line of business, primarily internal tools for internal employees.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, so let's kind of jump into it. So it feels like it should be common sense to care about the users, but that sometimes is not the case at some of these old school companies. Evangelizing UX is a skill that most UXers don't expect to have to exercise when they start jobs at enterprise companies. What are some aha moments where you finally got your organization to understand or get it?
Well, I can jump in here. And I forgot to say my pronouns, she, her, hers. But once upon a time, I worked at a retail company, very well known in Atlanta, that we'll just call Big Orange. And we were building an internal application, a shopping page for users to be able to go and buy their own new laptop and any accessories, trying to make the hardware refresh process very self-service. And they just wanted to kind of throw a page up that people could do that. And I said, if we're calling it a shopping page, it needs to feel like a shopping page. And I literally had to bring the product owner and some other stakeholders in a conference room and have them watch me shop on Target and Amazon and say, like, you know, our page compared to this doesn't make sense. When you add something to the cart, it doesn't tell you it's in the cart. So I think that for them, even though they all did online shopping on their own, seeing it right next to each other or right behind each other really helped make a point that internal customers matter, and we want it to be self-service. So we have to make it easy, just like everything else is.
Love that.
I can add to your Big Orange story. As a consultant, I had a client that had a lot of orange in their work, and they were very so brought in to help. They had a very successful in-store pilot of a new service that allowed consumers to bring in small engines to be repaired. It was really successful, but was losing money. And they thought it was because of the interface of the internal system that the employee used to actually kind of run through the process. And I would agree with that, but they wanted us to fix it and not talk to the users. I said, well, you tried that when you designed the system in the first place and it missed the mark. So maybe and so they were like, okay, well, you could maybe run a survey. Like, that's not going to do it. I said, well, could we just observe? We're not going to interview. They were very worried about interviewing the employees. And so I said, well, could we just observe? And so they said, okay, observe, but don't interfere with anything that's going on in the store. I'm like, that's exactly what in-field researchers do, to observe it in context. And we don't want to interfere. But we did have cameras on our phones. And so their biggest thing was there shouldn't be any problem with them using this software because we gave them a giant binder on exactly how to use the software. So we got on a plane and left Atlanta and went to Chicago and went to a store that had this pilot part of the retail going, and got out our little phones and captured on video exactly where that binder was in that store, which was holding up the end of a table that had broken its leg. And then we observed the fact that the lines in this store were so long for them to do this, that employees, instead of putting it into the system, employees were diagnosing the problem, going and fixing it for the customer, and never writing a ticket up because the ticketing process was the problem. And so they would send them away without having charged them because they couldn't have long lines because they would get dinged on that, but they didn't get dinged on the fact that they weren't actually running any sales through this particular register. Got all of that on video and wrote it up and put it in our presentation when we got back. And we were able to do a full-blown research project. So yeah, got some buy-in from that particular product owner at that particular moment. Doesn't always stick.
So Amber became the user. Deanne went and looked at the users. In my work, I more often just make sure they're part of my pictures. So like I've been doing a lot of back-end process flows. How are we going to do automatic provisioning? How are we going to ship hardware? How are we going to do all of these things? But behind all of those, both internal and external, there's a human motivation to do any of those moments. So as long as we make sure that the human boxes are there along with the system and the automatic email, it's not, can we say, user logs into the system after they receive an email. That's the same step as system sends automatic email and login occurs, right? But we can word it and to add the human in there because the human is there.
Yeah, that's a very good point. At making sure that you add the human in at any point in time. And I work a lot now in my role at Warner Media with a product owner that when he does lucid charts for workflow diagrams, he always puts the stick figure person in there to remind you that there's a person.
Yeah, it's so important. And I'm wondering, what lessons have you learned in terms of scaling design and research and UX? Enterprise companies can be pretty big.
Yeah.
Somehow I didn't hear you.
Oh, sorry. My question was, what lessons have you learned in terms of scaling like UX design, UX research at these big companies?
I'm currently in the position of doing like 3 jobs. So one trick I actually think I learned from Havana. I take an hour every Saturday and I make 5-minute or less videos of everything I can think of that I had to say more than 2 times that week. And I put them in a channel. And then that whole next week, I can send people a link to my video instead of having to type it all out. Thank
Oh,
you.
that's so good.
Thank you, Havana.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So that's not scaling UX necessarily, but is scaling me.
Mhm.
Nice.
So one thing that we did to scale when I was at a company, actually where I met Havana was at Career Builder. We had a UX department, and it was within our site technology department, and there was various levels of engagement where people needed UX. You may need a developer, you may need a researcher, and so we decided to run the UX department like a project management office. And so we would have people kind of submit to us, what is your need for UX? Do you need a consultation? Do you need a full-on front-end developer? Do you need research? And we highly encouraged that everyone did research. And then, they'd have to submit their projects to us every quarter. We take a look at it. We had moved to the Scale Agile framework, if you're familiar with that. So we would get the everything prioritized and then assign out the UX team based on the priority and the need. So that helped us scale our team, because we didn't get more resources to add more designers and developers and researchers, but that did allow us to really figure out what the priority was, figure out how much, I guess, involvement we needed, and then also push back on the product owner. Don't just use our time or ask us for a design that you get mad at and throw away. Give us a wireframe first so that we can build from that. So just putting a lot of processes in place to make it work.
Really.
Yeah, I've also looked for allies outside of the pure UX. You always have the people who are in adjacent, either a good BA, a traditional BA who's transitioned into product ownership or something else, that can help with some of the either identifying where we could have the most impact, or can do a little bit of the start of things, or even some of the more basics, so that you kind of have a multiplier, and helping to build that empathy into what they're doing on an everyday basis, so that you can kind of identify people who can help, and it helps you in your focus, or at least identify the need.
Yeah, and one thing that I'll add, working at a company that has merged with another over the past year, which has tripled, if not quadrupled, our design and research team, is the importance of looking to see what's before so that we don't duplicate work, and building the camaraderie as the team is scaling, so that you as you scale, you don't become siloed, because that's something that can easily happen is the teams get bigger and smaller teams form, and then you forget that you're part of a bigger team. So yeah, pulling from past work that has already been done, and using that to bolster your work, and then also serve as evidence in justification for you being there, and for them investing in other work, because sometimes teams scale and you're still not able to do what you want. Just because you get a bunch of funding to your department doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to do the design research work that you want. So always making the case for bigger and better work, I think is really important as teams grow.
Oh, such good. I'm jotting down notes over here. How have you successfully secured UX a seat at the table when it comes to product? How do you help product with strategy and planning?
I went first last time, but I have an answer.
Oh.
I've spent my whole career selling my ignorance. And if you ask the hard questions, people that's unusual. It's unusual to be vulnerable enough to ask really hard, deep questions. And then I will pull up Miro and I'll start making a picture of their answers. And clarifying that messy, persistent problem that nobody's dealing with in the room, that's of value. And that gets me in too many rooms now. Yeah. You go after the most interesting problem, you ask questions that are brave, and you make as many pictures as you can stand. And then everyone wants you at the table.
I agree. And sometimes you can get into the room if you volunteer to facilitate the meeting. If you're, and you can find there's an incredible power of being the one now virtually, but previously being the one standing at the board. And I always call it, you said you sell your ignorance. I always call it asking the dumb questions. Like,
Yes.
you know, you put it up there exactly as they said it, and you in your mind, your designer mind has already said, yeah, that doesn't really get you where you think you need to go. Let's unpack that and ask those. I was like, I'm just gonna ask a dumb question here, and then ask the question that's probably on most of the people in the room's mind, but they don't ever connect those dots. But they won't give you the seat at the table. If they'll give you a seat at the, or give you a marker at the board, you can move the discussion pretty quickly.
And I can vouch for that, because as a project manager, I tend to facilitate meetings a lot, and I ask the questions. I think it's great that I am not technical. I'm not a developer, because when I look at it, I look at it from a user standpoint. I'm often, to Karen's point, becoming the user. So I can look at that and say, well, what does that mean? Well, can you find a different way to say that? Because that doesn't make sense to me. Or what happens after that? You know, so that often gets me, as the one person in the room that has UX experience, specifically UX experience, it gets me a voice, and they start to look to me more. But then also, if there's a UX team that's available, then I can say, have we done any research? Can we pull the UX in? Because this doesn't make sense to me. I play dumb a lot.
Yeah.
This next question, I'm gonna direct at Rihanna, since you are our designer on here. How do you tackle like learning about the technical constraints of like legacy software and tackling like redesigns of, I'm sure you've redesigned your share of like super old, obsolete UIs.
Yeah. So I think almost as like an extension of what everyone was saying as a lead into this is relating your questions as a designer or as a UX practitioner to the business needs of the product person that you're talking to and the technical considerations of the developers that you're working with. Because I think sometimes we go into meetings and they think, you're just here to make the wireframes, you know, we're just going to tell you what's going to be on there and that's all you need. And it's almost like there have been times where I've had to be like, I about what the design is going to be. I'm asking you these questions because they help me with the design in these ways. So I want to hear from your perspective in relation to what I'm talking about as the UX person, what this information means. So specifically with tackling technical constraints, sometimes there are designers within your team that are former developers or who have experience working with APIs or who have just that technical acumen and that brain that makes them valuable in that way. So, and there is one person that I've worked with who is like that. So sometimes if I'm looking at an architectural model and I don't have a developer with me, I'll pull him and say, let's walk through this. I want to understand how this works. Like, what does this API say? But other times, there have been times where I've sat with a solutions architect and I've said, listen, I know that this is a feature that we have to design, but I want to know how this works. So I want you to walk through this with me as if you were talking to a colleague, another developer. And they'll do it. I think they're usually caught off guard that a designer wants to know that. But they're usually more after you've had a couple of meetings with them like that, they're more open to you know, negotiating in your favor when you do ask for other design things that might be a little bit more tricky technically, because you've shown that I'm considering what you're doing as a developer, but this is really important design-wise, and I want to do it, so let's do it. So yeah, I guess quickly to summarize is sitting down with the developers and letting them, asking them to walk through their diagrams with you, and then even as they're walking through them, writing it out as a UX person and translating it into plain English.
Oh, I love that. That's great. All right, so a lot of you work at companies that we're not software companies, but they're trying to, you know, come to the 21st century, right? So how do you like manage UX and UI improvements without scaring off the current customer base? Because I'm sure a lot of enterprise software they've got their power users, they've got like their super niche users. So how do you balance that?
So if I could, I'll jump in first. I think having conversations with the users, with your customers, find out their pain points. You get buy-in if they hate this one thing about the site and you're listening to them and you're like, oh, we can fix that. That's easy. Then they're more on board with changes that you have coming. But it's if you can solve pain points, you can get buy-in. That's it. It's that simple to me, at least.
I agree. And really trying to, so this extends to both, not just your business user, your enterprise user, but also your stakeholders in both the technical and business side of the house. I like to, I mean, we spend a lot of time building empathy for our users. I try to build empathy into the whole process. So the business stakeholders that you're trying to negotiate with, the development team that is trying to build it out for you, understanding that everybody is, they're not coming to work to do a bad job. Everybody is trying to do things from their own point of view. And so extending the same empathy that we naturally do as user experience professionals to our end users, extending that all the way through to everyone that you're talking to. So, you know, like if you're helping to implement a Salesforce implementation, but the sales guys that are going to be using this are literally pen and paper sales guys, and they don't want to put all of their contacts into Salesforce because their fear was that was going to replace them, that they can get rid, if you have all my contacts, then in the system, they weren't seeing it as a help to them. They were seeing it as the first step to them getting booted. And so being able to give reassurance about that as much as you can, because again, there's no guarantees that that won't happen, but really understanding what their reluctance is, and that empathy is really powerful. It's powerful in talking to them. It's powerful in relating that back to your business people and understanding why they need to maybe take a different tact in the change management or the release of software to make it more successful. Because that's the goal of everyone involved, is to make it successful. But everybody has just different points of view of what success looks like. And so I find it's our job to kind of try and pull all of those threads together into a shared view of success.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you.
Have you ever heard that expression, good is better than great?
Yeah.
It's never really made sense to me. And then once in a conversation, I realized the person was describing comfort is better than perfect.
Yeah.
So maybe in these transitions, we have to find some bit of comfort to keep. Maybe it's the color palette, maybe it's the labeling, maybe it's the navigation, maybe it's the data viz, like something. Can we give them some comfort still in these spaces as we make change?
Yeah, I know that sometimes you can kind of, like in Deanne's case, I don't know how you resolve that exactly, but like in one, it's kind of like reframing it, right? Because like, I mean, a Rolodex, like these salespeople are not Rolodexes, they're salespeople. So why don't we take out the tedium,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Do your job, right? So how do you guys manage expectations and out of scope ideas from project managers, from non-technical project managers?
Well, I'll take this since I'm the consultant of the panel at Current. I was in industry for a good long time too, but so it comes up quite a bit for a consultancy, because you know that project manager or business stakeholder thinks that you should do whatever they say, whether it's in scope or not. And so I learned early on. I had a great mentor early in my career, and her general mode around scope creep was, that's an interesting idea. Let's unpack that and understand what the pros and cons and the trade-offs are. And then when it becomes not, so everyone wants everything when it's free, when they start to have to make tough choices of, yeah, we absolutely can do that, but, and changing that, instead of it being no, it's a yes, and that means this, kind of a conversation. And so, unlimited time, money, and effort, yes, we could do all of it, but that's not anyone's reality. And so having and walking through what are the trade-offs, that's really it.
That was going to be my same answer. It's all about trade-offs. Yes, we can, but that means we can't do something else. What's most important to you?
I think at the enterprise level, those trade-offs become cloudier and cloudier. Until Honeywell, I was a consultant, and I miss change orders, and I miss my SOW, and I miss my WES. And now I'm in this world where, well, the head of product said it has to be done by June. Well, what is it? Well, he didn't define what it is. Just get it done by June. And how many stakeholders need to be aligned about what June means?
So,
I don't
Karan,
know, 200?
how does that happen? Like, do you know why? Like, do you know why, like, the bigger the company is, the more vague those trade-offs are?
I think it's just, I don't know if it's big or if it's internal. I'm still sorting through that myself. A year and a half in, I still wonder, is it that our process isn't mature yet? Is it that I'm internal and I don't have these protective documents? I'm still trying to figure it out.
So a lot of times it's revenue driven. For example, with Warner Media, we had a huge release last year with HBO Max. And so that disrupted the roadmap for pretty much everybody. And my team was working on some things to make sure that the digital content can make it to HBO Max. So we kind of designed and implemented those workflows. And we have lots of customers. All of the brands that under Warner Media are customers. So we had to tell TBS and TNT that we couldn't do things because HBO Max, and it was the way that was set up because there was so much revenue and so much hype around it. We couldn't control the scope creep. It was creeping. It still creeps. But we had to have conversations with everybody else, or we had to have the conversation and say, hey, if we're doing this, that means we can't do this. And then we had to go and tell the other brands, hey, we can't do that. And so now it's less HBO Max and more NBA related now, because NBA does the same thing, but it's definitely revenue and the politics behind it.
And I think in internal teams, the level that the org structures start to come together, the higher up those levels go, the more sway that comes. Like if you're at I'm in charge of getting the revenue for HBO Max, and I'm in charge of revenue for TNT. That level is so high, and it's so big stakes are involved, and so you're talking about some serious egos and deliverables, dollars that are behind it before you can get to a true decision.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just quickly add this last point. I've only ever worked in-house, so I don't know about the difference between consulting and working in-house. But one thing that I've noticed over the years is that it's almost like an extension of the point you're making, Deanne, about learning about what these people are like, building empathy and understanding where they're coming from. Usually there's some kind of motivation behind a feature beyond like, I was just dreaming and this brilliant idea came to me. Sometimes it's, well, dang, I'm really not confident in this feature set that we're delivering, and we got to have something that's wow, like we need a data visualization, or I saw that this competitor had this thing and we really want to differentiate, when we release this. So let's try to get it before they implement it. There's always something there. And so asking those questions, like, the probing questions to understand, like, so why are you really asking about this now? Why is this something that came to you in this moment while we're talking? Can also help you sort of talk them off the ledge, or talk them through, or help them work through what's really motivating the requests that they're making. Sometimes it's not that dramatic. Sometimes they really just do think it's a good idea, and it might actually be. You just have to do it later.
And that's a great point about the actual motive from the stakeholders, because sometimes I've learned being motivated by private versus public stakeholders, for example, can really make a difference, right? And one of the other things I wanted to ask was, okay, so I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are still at companies where, people see UX as like, oh, you make pretty screens, you make pretty pages. What's your advice to the designers out there on how to communicate their value beyond just feature delivery?
Did anyone want to jump in on that? If not, I'll go. I think that ensuring that the work that you're presenting is as evidence-based as possible is great, to sort of prove that I'm not just sort of, fluttering around and putting things together, on a whim. There's actually thought and logic behind this. And one thing actually that we've started doing on my team under my new manager is for each of the major features that we're designing, listing out the assumptions that you're making. And in addition to that, listing the source of that assumption. Why are you making that assumption? Is it something you've seen in the market? Is it based on some past research? Is it an anecdote that you've heard a couple of people say internally? So you're it might be true, but maybe you're not too sure. And then as you're presenting your work, you can talk through those assumptions that you're making. And that can be the evidence behind what you're presenting. That also helps you sort of begin conversations around this thing that I just designed. We've made 10 assumptions that are kind of loose. So do we want to test this thing now or later? What kind of research do we need to do in order for us to feel more confident about the assumptions that I've made? And that'll also help stave off the people who, come to you with their feelings. I feel like it's not right. Well, this is what we know, and this is what I'm assuming. Do you disagree with that assumption? Okay, you don't. So I think we really should go with this direction. And if something changes, or if you really feel confidently that it's that questionable, let's test it, because you'll get into these endless cycles of rehashing designs over weeks behind different people's feelings about what may or may not be right. So it's listing assumptions and discussing those as you're presenting your work.
I think it's really important to start any conversation not showing screens. Maybe you don't have assumptions, maybe you have the 3 most important things about the product, or maybe you have what I heard. Maybe you have a what I heard slide. Hey, you talked to me for 10 minutes. This is what I heard, and this is what I did with it. Get the conversation on the facts before that gets distracted with font choices and colors and alignment, and have the conversation you want to have by really constructing the order you want to have it in. If you put up your screen, you're going to talk about your screen.
Yeah. Building your case before you make it, before they've gotten distracted, because I've certainly made that mistake before, where I started showing something, and then as I'm in the middle of talking through it, somebody jumps in. Well, when are we going to get the design? It's listen, I'm not even done talking. So yeah, that's also a good point. Is starting off, not kicking off with showing design first, and then this is the last point I'll make on this topic. The team that I work on, we work on dedicated product teams, so I'm always presenting pretty much the same people over and over again. But what we do is we present work in phases, and we talk about work in phases. So we talk first about a design, independent of any design. We're not looking at any screens. We're just talking through stuff at the story level. And then we show a prototype, and then lastly, we look at final visual design. So that can also help, showing or talking through the same thing multiple times from different angles. so that by the time they see the final work, it's not like they're shocked at, what you came up with.
Yeah.
Progressive buy-in.
Yeah.
Really what you're talking about, and that's critical, because if people make up, we're narrative creatures, we make up our own stories, and so if you're not bringing them along with you as you go through the journey of understanding the needs and then building designs to meet that need, they're not coming along with you. If they're like there for a kickoff and they're there for a final demo, you're dead. There will be no, you can't get them back, and you've lost all that time. You have no backtracking to course correct. It's just like, even if you move forward with the design, they will never commit to it. In the back of their mind, it would have always been somehow different, and in whatever they thought of themselves off on an island. So co-creation, any ways that you can get them involved in early research, early concepting, make them write some user journeys, make them talk about it, and in words before you get to the pictures, and as early and as often as it can happen within whatever constraints your company has, for time and ideas, and and that includes business and technology, because you don't want the technologists not to have any stake in it at all either.
If I can echo Deanne, I like for them to be a part of the creation process for sure. As the project manager, I like to ask a lot of questions, a lot like a therapist, like, why do you think that? Who told you that was a good idea? Like, who told you that was a problem? Did we get any feedback from actual users? And that's how I honestly pitch using user researchers most of the time, is like, where'd that come from? Why do we think that's a problem? Have you used it? And then they'll say, okay, well, maybe we need to get someone in here to help us figure this out. We'll do some research, or we'll do a POC and have some people test it and get feedback, and then we'll know which direction we need to go.
Oh, so
yeah, I'll just think this last, Amber, you sparked something in my brain. I didn't realize like how confidently certain people will assert information without knowing it's true. I learned that, over the past 2 years, until I can't even remember the exact circumstances, but somebody told me something. They said it with a lot of confidence. I was sharing that information, and then somebody asked me, well, how do you know that it's true? And I was like, actually, I don't know. Let me go ask them. And I asked them, and they were like, oh, we don't. We've heard this from like one person. And I was like, scratch everything I just said.
Oh my God.
But yeah, it's like, it's really common. I don't know if it's an in-house thing, or if it's just like a working in the world thing that people, I think it's just a human thing that people, and I don't think it's because they're trying to mislead you, but you ask them a question, they give you an answer. They don't necessarily know what you're going to do with that information. And so they don't always know that it's better to just say, I don't really know, or to give you, like, provide some sort of caveat with what they're saying if it's not an actual fact. But yeah, that's something that also happens.
I've often thought that would be a good book, this UX design and the stories people tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're gonna go ahead and jump into some audience questions. I see the chat is lighting up. I don't know if you paid attention to it, but I'm gonna start with one from Gatami.
Where's the Q&A? Well, if you wanted to join the Q&A and check that out, you should have been there. Ladies at UX ATL has meetups every third Thursday of every month, and we cover some awesome topics. Go to meetup.com to check out our upcoming events for 2021. And why should you join if we're gonna put it up on our channel like this? Well, Ladies at UX ATL does icebreaker sessions where you can actually meet and network virtually. So we like to continue that networking aspect of meetups. And also, you learn about job openings, you learn about speaker opportunities, you learn about community announcements when you join the actual meetup. And then finally, You get to take part in Q&As with the actual speaker. Sometimes the discussion afterwards turns out even better than the talk, so I highly recommend that you join. How do you join? Go to meetup.com, look up Ladies That UX ATL, and sign up as a member, RSVP to some of the events we've got coming up, and also add us on LinkedIn and Twitter to catch up on announcements and opportunities and learn a lot more about some of the things we've got going on. Anyways, see you there again. That's the third Thursday of each and every month, and I will see you soon. Thank you. Bye.